Welcome to another episode of the early history of Bigfoot. I'm your host, James Mallory, and today we're diving into one of the more intriguing aspects of Bigfoot lore, the auditory evidence. Specifically, we'll be focusing on the mysterious sounds linked to Bigfoot encounters from the 1940s to the 1960s. This period was rich with personal accounts and news stories that captured the imagination and fear of many. Sounds that have been described as eerie howls echoing through the forests. Strange thuds and other unexplainable noises have left those who heard them both bewildered and curious. Let's explore what these auditory encounters tell us, how they fuel the legend of Bigfoot, and their cultural significance during this fascinating era. To appreciate the auditory evidence in Bigfoot lore, we must first understand its significance. Auditory evidence is an important part of the puzzle when it comes to cryptids like Bigfoot. Unlike sighting reports, which can be dismissed as optical illusions or hoaxes, sounds are more ambiguous and harder to fake. They add an element of mystery that ignites the imagination. From howling to tree knocking, these sounds have been the subject of fascination and debate for decades. In many encounters, it's the sounds in the dead of night, a bone-chilling howl or a series of thuds that often precede or follow visual sightings of this elusive creature. These auditory encounters draw a blurry line between natural and supernatural explanations, prompting further investigation and speculation. Let's take a closer look at some notable auditory encounters from the 1940s to the 1960s. During this time, society was very much engaged in exploring unknown frontiers, and the cryptid that became central to this exploration in North America was indeed Bigfoot. For example, in the summer of 1943, there were numerous reports from the dense woodlands of Washington state, where locals described hearing unsettling howls that went on for hours. These weren't just random sounds mistaken for animal calls, but rather deep, resonating cries that sent shivers down the spine of those who heard them. Witnesses spoke of a peculiar rhythm to the howls, almost as if the creature was trying to communicate or establish its presence. Moving into the 1950s, another famous incident involved a group of campers in the Appalachian Mountains in 1955. They reported not only seeing something large and hairy briefly illuminate by their campfire, but also hearing unnerving gurgling growls. It was a sound they described as something between a bear's roar and a human-like gurgle, a chilling hybrid noise they didn't think possible from any known animal in the area. These auditory encounters added layers to the personal accounts of those who claimed to have come face-to-face with Bigfoot, sometimes leaving the credibility of these stories hinging on such crucial sensory details. One of the elements that make these sounds both fascinating and mystifying is their variety. For some witnesses, it was an inexplicable knock on wood that caught their attention, an apparent communication method that involved rhythmically tapping large logs. This kind of auditory evidence was reported numerous times in the Pacific Northwest throughout the 1960s. Others described what they could only assume were loud thuds, similar to something large moving or stamping nearby their locations. These thuds, when recorded and investigated, were found to be without any discernible pattern that one would expect if it was the work of something known like a human or an identifiable animal. Let's now delve into some of the personal accounts from witnesses who have described these experiences. Jane Freeman, a resident from British Columbia, recounted her experience in the early 1950s when she heard what she could only describe as a howl that pierced the quiet of the nighttime forest. In her words, it was mournful, yet there was a power to it that made your skin crawl. For her, it wasn't just the sound itself that was unnerving. It was the profound silence that followed, as if the entire forest was holding its breath. She further noted that subsequent investigations revealed no known animal as the source of such a primeval, chilling sound. Another compelling narrative comes from a hunter in Oregon during the winter of 1959. He described sitting quietly in his deer stand in the early morning before sunrise when he was startled by a series of sharp knocks in the distance. These weren't random noises that could easily be mistaken for falling branches or woodpeckers. No, he described them as deliberate and methodical, like a coded message being tapped out. Despite his experience in the woods, he wasn't able to explain the origin. His account gained traction in local media, sparking curiosity and debate over whether these could be attempts at communication from a species yet to be discovered. As with any intriguing mystery, there were attempts to capture these sounds, resulting in some historical recordings that we can still analyze today. In the late 1950s, a team of amateur cryptozoologists managed to set up recording equipment in areas of frequent Bigfoot sightings in Northern California. They documented a series of howls and knocks, resulting in one of the earliest forms of purported Bigfoot auditory evidence. At the time, these recordings played a significant role in fueling both public interest and skepticism. Modern analysis of these recordings using advanced technologies has yet to authenticate them definitively, but the consistency of their characteristics with more recent recordings cannot be ignored. Investigations into these auditory claims were varied and complex. In many cases, local authorities as well as scientists would be called in to verify the reports. However, as with many Bigfoot-related inquiries, concrete conclusions were rare. The lack of physical evidence to accompany the sounds made it challenging to provide a scientific explanation. This did not deter some researchers who continued to pursue leads, gather more recordings, and compile data. These investigations often led to broader discussions about the possibility of undiscovered species of large primates, yet they always seemed to end in more questions than answers. The cultural impact of these sounds on the perception of Bigfoot cannot be overstated. During the 1940s to the 1960s, Bigfoot moved from being a regional legend to a broader cultural phenomenon. The idea of strange, ape-like yet humanoid creatures lurking in the forests captivated the public imagination, aided in no small part by these eerie auditory encounters. Books, movies, and even television segments began to capitalize on the growing interest, turning Bigfoot into a mythical figure that straddles the line between fact and folklore. The sounds contributed to a narrative that Bigfoot wasn't just a visual ghost story. It was something that could and did reach out from the dark to influence the senses. This relationship between folklore and scientific inquiry into understanding Bigfoot is quite fascinating. On one side, you have a strong folkloric tradition centered around stories passed down through generations, which often include references to large unknown creatures. On the other, the emergence of cryptozoology sought to examine these claims using scientific methods. It's a delicate balance because belief often sits at the core of what pushes these investigations forward. The challenges faced in reconciling the stories, sounds, and sparse physical evidence into a cohesive scientific narrative often reflect broader debates about the nature of belief and the boundaries of knowledge. In summary, the auditory encounters with Bigfoot from the 1940s to the 1960s contribute significantly to the broader narrative of Bigfoot in American history. They are an essential facet of the complex tapestry that makes up Bigfoot's mythical existence, a mixture of fear, fascination, and the unending quest for understanding. Whether through spine-chilling howls or rhythmic wood knocks, the sounds attributed to Bigfoot continue to intrigue both enthusiasts and skeptics alike, reminding us of the mysterious world that still awaits exploration. Join me next time as we continue to explore the stories that have shaped the narrative of this legend that refuses to fade away. Until then, I'm James Mallory, and you've been listening to the early history of Bigfoot.